Hello, we are here in Mannheim at the 21st Arbeitstagen zur Gesprächsforschung. I'm here talking to Professor Arnulf Deppermann. He is the head of the Pragmatics Department at the Institute für Deutsche Sprache. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed for the DARGchive project. Is that part of the university, or is it
No, it's an independent research institute, and it's the only one which is specialized on German language in Germany. You could say it's similar to a Max Planck Institute.
All right.
So it's funded by the state and by the federal state in parts. And so I am also a professor at the University of Mannheim, and I have some teaching duties. But it's only 2 weeks per week. So 2 hours per week. So this means one seminar and then a couple of minor talks and so on, which I have to give at the university. But my main work is here at the Institute for the German Language, and so my department is the Pragmatics Department. We have 3 departments in total: the Grammar Department, a Lexis Department, the Pragmatics Department, and in my department I have some 30 co-workers I have to guide, supervise, counsel, whatever.
That's great. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are not only doing, I must admit, we are not doing only interactional research. So the largest part is devoted to CAE, interactional linguistics, but we also have some people working in my department on variational linguistics. And we have a large corpus sub-department, you could say. So a third of my colleagues here is dealing with preparing corpora, recording corpora, doing corpus editing, doing corpus linguistic, developing corpus linguistic tools for search and query, for instance.
Wow, that's fascinating. So that means that there's a lot of data available to work on.
Yeah, we host the largest corpora of spoken German all over the world. So we have some, I guess by now it's more than 22,000 recordings. The major part is audio recordings for sure, and the major part also is dialectal recordings. So we have data from varieties of German all over the world. Not only in the German region, but also from the States and from Eastern Europe, quite a lot from Hungary, from Romania, where there are linguistic minorities speaking of German speakers. But we also have the largest corpora of talk and interaction from German, and we are creating a large scale, so to speak, reference corpus of German talk and interaction. This is available online. By now it's 250 hours or 270 hours which are fully transcribed and fully aligned, so you can get at whichever point you like to in the transcript and hear the sound recordings, and a third of it by now is also video recording, so you can also access the video online and do analysis, and then you have also rich metadata available about the speakers and about their recording settings and some ethnographic observations and so on.
That's such an amazing resource.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I think, we are a research institute, but at the same time we are also an infrastructural institute, and so I think a major part of our duties, at least as I conceive of it, is also really to provide for infrastructures and opportunities to work for the larger community.
That's fascinating. So I think we kind of already started, so to speak.
Yeah,
so,
no problem. So just go on.
I'm gonna go back to my questions, which seem not as interesting as the things that we've already talked about. But in any case, can you tell me how you got interested in conversational analysis?
Yes, originally I'm a psychologist by training, so I have my first diploma in psychology, and in Germany, psychology is only quantitative, and it was that way too way back in the 80s when I did my studies. And during my psychology studies, so there were a couple of other students and myself, and we had created some self-organized seminars, reading groups, you could say, where we read texts on qualitative research, on phenomenology, on Marxist psychology, on psychoanalysis. So all different varieties of psychology which were not represented in the academic agenda at that time, but which we thought were much closer to what we thought were really interesting psychological topics. And then so it was at the end of my the first part of my studies when I became a student assistant in one of the very rare qualitative projects we had in psychology in Germany at that time. And this was a research project on biographical interviews with brain damaged patients from the Second World War. And so I got into biographical research and narrative research, and narrative is a topic which I'm dealing with from time to time. And I became interested in, well, let's say, trying to devise a method of analyzing these interviews, which strongly built on insights into language and communication. And so that's when I became interested in CA, because I recognized so I have to really draw on what we know from conversational interaction, also from research on interview interaction. And so that's why I became interested in CA. And then I, funnily enough, it was in 1991, then I did an internship at this institute here.
Wow.
I spent half a year here for a research internship. Yeah. Because at my institute here we have a long tradition in CA research or CA related research. It was not really classical CA, it was much more ethnographically inspired interpretation of CA, you could say. But CA has come here already in the late 1970s, and it always since then always had a place in this institute.
All right.
Yeah.
So could you talk a bit about your academic trajectory and the positions you have held in the past and the kind of work you did there?
Yeah, so I first completed my psychology diploma, and then during my PhD, I increasingly changed to linguistics, you could say. So, and then I started studying linguistics and philosophy for a second degree, and this was in parallel to my PhD. And in my PhD, I also I got to know discursive psychology, and I worked quite a lot with discursive psychology approaches, because my PhD, which is this book here, is on credibility in conflict talk in mediation sessions. So it's very close also in terms of the kinds of data as data which Derek Edwards and Stokoe have dealt with. And so and Edwards and Potter's writings have been very influential for me, because I at that time I also tried to in a way combine CAE with a rhetorics approach concerning these data. And then when I had finished my PhD, for which I get a grant from the from a Studienstiftung of the German people, then I worked in sociology for 9 years. So it was in Frankfurt, and they hired me because I was specialized in CA and ethnography also. For research, originally for a research project on peer group interaction of adolescents, and so this was a major research focus for some 5-6 years, where we tried to, in a way, conceptualize adolescent culture as communicative culture, you could say. So drawing on also on studies like the Goodwins and Corsaro and some ethnographically oriented research. And then, well, in 2005, funnily enough, I got my first professor position in linguistics, and this was really funny because I hadn't worked for an hour in linguistics at that point. So I had worked in psychology and I had worked in sociology, but never in linguistics. But at that time I was very lucky, because this was a position especially for oral communication, it was called. And in linguistics, still oral communication, at least at that time, it was not researched, that much research, so I had a good chance to get this position. And then This was at Düsseldorf University. I stayed there only for half a year, and then I already got this position here at the Institute for the German Language. Yes, and here at our institute, the work is organized in a couple of large-scale projects, and I'm involved in 3 or 4 of them. So one is on the interactional constitution of meaning. So I'm very much interested in how the words people use acquire their meanings in context.
Right.
So, and the question is not so much to devise a lexicon, also a dictionary, but the idea is to identify the practices people use to accomplish, to negotiate, to clarify, to repair, and so on, local meanings. So what do I mean by this term in this situation for this recipient? And so practices are, for instance, very obviously giving a definition or providing an example. Contrasting is very important, so making contrast with other terms, using negation. For instance, I'm very much interested in studying negation as a recipient designed tool. So because you can see when people negate something, well, you could negate all different kinds. You could say it's not raining now, or there is not a highway running here in front of the house. So, but when do you negate something, and why do you negate? And at least from my point of view, or from the studies I've been doing on this yet, it seems that negation is a means to tailor what you are saying very neatly to the specific recipient, to what you think that the other person might be the case, but which you want to discard as not being the case, or what also in terms of contradiction, so what you're opposed to, what the other person thinks, or also in order to discard misunderstandings. So, for instance, saying I mean X but not Y, and Y is a possible interpretation that you could have. So this is one project. The other project is on multimodal interaction, and this is also for me a little bit linked to this interaction constitution of meaning. So I'm interested in how people combine, coordinate different resources in interaction to produce complex meanings. For instance, in instructions, so I did quite a lot of work in instructions on driving school. So driving school data are very interesting, I think, because you have a lot of concepts which are introduced and a lot of new skills which people should be taught or are taught, and multimodality plays a major role, that's obvious. Another corpus which I'm starting right now to work on with my colleague Axel Schmidt is on instructions in theater rehearsals, and this is also linked to my interest in longitudinal interactional structure building, you could say, and the relevance of interactional histories. So we are trying to track how an artistic concept is introduced for the first time, and the director says, oh well, play a scene in a certain way, and then how this gets worked out over a series of rehearsals, and how finally some routines of formulating things and shortcuts develop, which then which produce routines and which make understandings very smooth, you could say, whereas in the beginning there is much repair, much negotiation, checking, and so on. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so these were the other 2 major projects, and then 2 other, let's say, minor projects. One is on refugees at the workplace. You know, we have a lot of refugees who have come to Germany over the last years, and we have an ethnographic project, but ethnographic CA project, where we do a lot of recordings with refugees at the workplace in meetings and in instructions mainly, and we study the interaction between the refugees, so it's also about their acquisition of linguistic and communicative competence, but also how the people from the host society will try to deal with them in terms of also again clarifying meanings, checking understandings, and working out understandings collaboratively. So and I've just completed the first paper on this now. And the fourth aspect, fourth project is more devoted to working on the corpora. We are trying to now devise some segmentation guidelines for oral corpora in terms of TCUs. So, and how can you operationalize in a way the notion of a TCU? This is the idea of this project. So, and it should be, and the challenge in a way is to really to find solutions which work for whole corpora. So because you can see that the notions are rather prototypically constituted, so they work very well for a lot of cases. But then you have a lot of things in your corpora like cutoffs and like some weird expanded structures, or mainly this is something which we are working now on, where boundaries of actions really do not coincide with TRPs. And so what do you do in these cases? Yeah. And what does this mean or amount to in terms of the notion of a TCU? So well, now I'm inclined to interpret TCUs much more in terms of basic actions, but while we have to check how this relates to the turn-taking machinery or system, which is maybe more obvious home environment of the TCU.
I look forward to that application, that's for sure. So I want to ask you a little bit about conversation analysis in Germany and its history, how it became popular, and I know the Institute for German Language played a huge role in that. Yeah,
so I guess the first person who brought CA to Germany was Jörg Bergmann, who is also, I guess, quite renowned in the Anglo-American countries. And because he studied at UCLA, but then already also in the late 1970s, it was my predecessor here at the Institute for the German Language, Werner Karlmeier, who introduced CA in the context of linguistics. So Jörg Bergmann was a sociologist, and this Karlmeier was a linguist. There were some frictions at that time in terms of who has the right interpretation of CA, and but then over time, over the years, CA increasingly disappeared from sociology. One must say, virtually nowadays there's virtually nobody anymore who does CA in sociology in Germany, whereas in linguistics it has a quite good standing. I would not say that it's not like in Finland, where the majority of linguists seem to do CA. So that's not the case for Germany. The majority does psycholinguistics, corpus linguistics, generative grammar, and things like this, or cognitive linguistics. But we have I guess we have a quite good standing, and it's accepted as part of the agenda, you could say. And in Germany, an important person also is Margaret Zelting, who together with Elisabeth Skupper-Kuhn, who also have worked for quite a long period in Germany, and they are the founders of interactional linguistics. And I would say that interactional linguistics now is very well established in Germany, and there are a couple of people who do important work in this line of, or in this sub-discipline, like Peter Auer and Susanne Güntner, and yes, for sure, Peter Kupper-Cohen, Margaret Zelting, Elisabeth Gülich, and myself as well. So these are important people, and I guess also increasingly on an international scale. We publish increasingly papers also in English. And as in our institute, I guess is important for the scene, because we have this regular annual conference on discourse and conversation analysis. Together with another PhD student, we founded this way back in 1995 already. So it was originally it was a PhD meeting, because there wasn't anything specialized on CA at that time on research on talk in social interaction at that time, and then it grew over time. And since 2003, the conference is hosted at this institute here, and it has grown over the time. And as I told you, last year we had some 160 attendance. The year before, for instance, we had a conference on. We always have a conference theme. We had a conference on. Last year it was interaction in media. The year before it was discourse markers. And this was also 130 attendance only, although it was only discourse markers. So, there is a community. It's a community meeting too. So it's very important for us also to integrate the PhD students into the conference, to give them the opportunity to present their projects and in a way to show themselves to the larger public, and to be able to get connected to the larger scene. Then we have an online journal, which is very important, I guess. It has been co-founded by Martin Hartung, a colleague of mine, and a good friend, and myself. Yeah. So we founded it in 2000, and it's an online journal which is, we publish some 300 pages every year, and yes, and it's also increasingly, we have increasingly English-speaking publications, and the English-speaking title is Discourse and Conversation Analysis, and in German it's called Gesprächsforschung. Yeah, and this is an open access online journal. So, I was going to ask so it's, and I personally, I must say, when I look at my own Google Scholar estimates, so I can see that the papers which I have published also in this journal, they are ranked most highly, and this is, I think, probably they're not always the best ones, but they are accessible, and I think this open access option is very, very important for distributing our research.
Yeah, it's really useful to have your papers available. And speaking of the Journal of Discourse and Conversation Analysis, as the editor of the journal, looking back on the kind of work that you've had submitted to the journal, are there any reflections about trends in conversation analysis that you can share?
Well, I guess a major trend now is multimodality. So this is, I think, also personally for me, because I'm also into this somehow, it's very important. Then we have an increasing interest in cognitive issues. So the epistemics debate is also important in our journal, and so there are increasing attempts really to combine somehow cognitive perspectives with CA perspectives, both in a more critical vein, like the discursive psychology people do, but also more in an affirmative way, you could say. So people from cognitive linguistics, for instance, become interested in discourse and in trying to deal with CA approaches. And I think it's very fruitful to have these discussions. So last year, for instance, we had a larger workshop or colloquy in Freiburg on inferences in interaction. So I thought it was very inspiring, very interesting. Yes, then what is then? Well, there's an increasing trend to the basic core linguistic issues. So there are increasing amount of studies, especially also in Germany and in Scandinavia, where you really can see that this is interactional research done by people coming from linguistics. So they focus on linguistic form, and the linguistic form really is the point of departure for the research. And well, then you have the sequential and social and functional issues, but this is some kind of work which would never have been done or could not have been done in a sociological context. And I think it, for me at least, as it seems, mainly has become even the majority, at least in some parts. And I think this is good for linguistics, to be sure. Sometimes I'm a little bit sad, you could say, that some of those more societal and, so to speak, larger ramifications which CA research could have are forgotten or not attended to. So maybe this is not reproachable for linguists, but some potential which CA has, and I think which is also relevant and important both for its standings in the social sciences and for its societal impact, gets a little bit lost when we only focus on this very, very narrow sequential context and the precise linguistic details.
Yeah, that's so true. So you mentioned the conference, the yearly conference that the institute organizes, the Arbeitstag zur Gesprächsforschung. But also the institute has been the home for other even bigger conferences. So in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, the institute organized the ICCA conference.
So it was the predecessor somehow of what you are doing this year in Loughborough. Yes, we had some 650 attendants, so it was really huge. And we had at that time the conference theme multimodal interaction.
Interesting.
In the and before the conference began, there was some quarreling about this. I can just to admit this, because some people thought, well, that's not a proper CA topic, or that's a little bit marginal. But I think it was really a huge success, and I would claim that it really helped to promote and to spread the word in favor of this approach. So it was important, and I know, for instance, that it was a really big thing for Chuck Goodwin at that time to really get this coverage, you could say, to be able to speak to such a huge CA community and to see how well he was received. So not being as an outsider or as a renegade, but to be someone who really does central work for CA. And I think this was important, and so I was very glad about what we achieved by this conference, also in this sense of the development of the field.
That's amazing, and speaking of conferences, you're getting ready to host another big conference next year. The call for papers for IIEMCA just went out last week. And you settled on a topic, practices. And could you talk a bit about the topic and the keynote speakers and how the preparations are going?
Yeah, I think practices is a central topic both for CAE and for ethnomethodology, and we thought it would be nice to maybe theorize this topic a little bit more, because I think it's especially our take at actions and what actions are, and which could be distinctive, but it also importantly brings in the bodily, the multimodal aspect of actions. And so we thought this might be a nice also meeting point for the people coming from CA, for whom practices in terms of interactional practices are central. And we have, for instance, John Heritage as a plenary speaker who already had written on this, and we thought it would be nice to expand a little bit this more traditional CA view on practices which he has, and Lorenza Mondada and Christian Heath as two other plenary speakers. They will rather deal with multimodal practices and see how the body figures in practices, and how, for instance, notions like what Lorenza has termed a multimodal gestalt relate to practices, and how you can conceive of practices in terms of the asynchronicities of different bodily modalities. So because the picture is much more clear-cut if you have only verbal actions or only transcripts, right? It's easy to segment really the stream of acting into actions, whereas if you look at the multimodal data, then it often becomes much more difficult, because you see that there's so much things going on in parallel, and some actions seem to prefigure others, or a person seems to do one thing still with their hands while already talking about something else, or looking into a third direction which still projects another activity. So there are a lot of questions in terms of the identification of practices, the identity of individual practices and so on, which are to be solved. And then we have Christian Meyer from Constance University, who tries to revitalize ethnomethodology in Germany, also from a point of view of embodied interaction. And I think it's important also for this conference to have people who come both from CA and from ethnomethodology, and he will be more the ethnomethodology chap, but Lorenza has also been very much into ethnomethodology. And we have Liz Stocco, and you know she did this important work on membership categorization, which also in a way tries to bring these two approaches together. And I think she will contribute to the practices issue from a more applied point of view with her CALM, our role-playing method. And because I thought it is very interesting to see how the instructability of practices looks from a CA point of view, given that, well, we have these tenets of ethnomethodological indifference saying, well, practice has not be to be ameliorated or optimized by us, but we just have to understand it in the first place. But then you have an interventional method, so how can you account for this from a CA point of view? So I thought these are challenges which we have to face somehow, and I thought Liz would be the perfect person to deal with this.
Fascinating. Could you talk a bit about some of the previous projects that you've been involved in here in the Institute for German Language?
Yeah, so when I came here to work at this Institute for the German Language in 2006, we started a research project on understanding and interaction. So the idea was to do a study on how understanding is organized in different types of sequences, how it is which role do response particles play for indexing different kinds of understanding, and how does understanding work in different kinds of interactional contexts, interaction types. So for instance, we were studying work on the film set, so on film production, and for instance the understanding of artistic concepts. A different thing then was understanding inductor-patient interaction, and we also tried to look also at some discursive practices which have not been so much understood in terms of understanding, for instance questioning. So we were wondering what kind of understandings of prior discourse do questions or the question design embodies. So if you, for instance, produce a WH question, you have different presuppositions about what you have already understood, as opposed to, for instance, doing a polar interrogative or declarative question. And so this is a little bit similar to the work which Heritage has been doing on the impact of epistemics on action formation. And so you could say it's a variety of this kind of research, because we were rather interested in how the immediate prior turns have been shown to be understood by question design. So this was one thing we've been dealing with. Another thing was the more larger processes of sequential organization, and I became especially interested then in the relationship between sequential displays of understanding and simultaneous displays of understanding. You know, there's been quite a lot of work already in the 1980s by Chuck Goodwin on the role of simultaneity in interaction, and so I've been following this line of research. And this was also a major point which motivated my interest in multimodal interaction. And then we already talked about this at the ICCA 2010. We had this conference theme, multimodal interaction, and from this this special issue of the Journal of Pragmatics on multimodal interaction from a conversation analytic point of view was a result of the plenaries and a couple of other papers which were closely linked to this conference theme. And so for me, for instance, I was interested in which kinds of tasks, so to speak, do people have to deal with from a multimodal perspective when starting a turn. And so displaying understanding is one major task. So how does what I do now relate to what has been happening up to that point in the interaction? And projection is another task, so to show, well, what kind of action will the upcoming action be, and also from a multimodal point of view, so securing attention to the upcoming turn. So this is basically the most basic task one has to deal with. So this study on understanding, first of all, was very much also directed to different sorts of institutional discourse. So as I said, doctor-patient interaction, interaction in social work, interaction in on the film set. And then I increasingly turned to this study of multimodal interaction, and so for me, then I've mainly dealt with driving school interactions in the last years. Another line of research I've been dealing with quite a lot is research more closely in the area of interactional linguistics. Mm-hmm. So I've been working on grammaticalization in German. So how certain discourse markers emerge from verbal constructions. Like in English, you have items like I mean, or also I thought. So in German, it's also ich dachte, I thought, which there's been a nice paper by Mick Smith, and we've been doing a similar study in German on ich dachte, and we saw that the range of uses which he had discovered also exist for German, but we still discovered some other uses. Another item which also led to, especially in the Journal of Pragmatics, was ich weiß nicht, I don't know, which also increasingly becomes grammaticalized as a marker of, which does not virtually or literally assert not knowing, but which is used as a disclaimer or as downgrading the obligation to truth or adequacy of formulation. Mm-hmm. So, and this was then these studies were collected somehow in this volume, Verben im interaktiven Kontext, verbs in interactional context, where we did some studies on mental verbs in German and on verbs of movement, and we specifically focused on these formulae and these discourse marker constructions which have emerged from verbs in German, which are typical for spoken interaction and which you almost never encounter in written interaction. But well, of course, still they increasingly also exist in social media. So we also did some comparison between writing, traditional forms of writing like scientific prose and newspapers, as opposed to language use in social media, and opposed to informal interaction and institutional interaction, in order to see also some kinds of distribution. But I think so this is the more corpus linguistic side of it, but I think, at least for me, the more CA related or interactionally related work in terms of sequential positions and sequential uses, and also the relationship of word order. And in German, there are a lot of possibilities of eliding things, like I can not only say I don't know, I can say don't know, I don't know this, or I don't know it, so ich weiß es nicht, ich weiß das nicht. And you have a more flexible word order, like you can have das weiß ich nicht, or ich weiß das nicht. And we also try to tease out what are the more subtle differences of the uses of these different word order and constituent and realizations of the word, of the formula. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So over the past few days, I've noticed that there's quite a large and very well integrated CA community here. Yeah. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that and the institutions that kind of support the community.
Yeah. So yes, I think the CA community in Germany has grown over the last 20 years quite a bit. And we also have quite a lot of younger people who have joined the community, and a regular supply, you could say, of young PhD researchers who joined the community. Well, in Germany, originally we weren't so much into classical CA, so there has been a German variety, you could say, of CA, which was quite marked by research on ethnography on the one hand, and by a linguistic perspective on the other hand. And it's only been, since 20 years or so, that increasingly we have a more internationally minded community which does interactional linguistics. It's mainly interactional linguistics in Germany, in the way which is more akin to what we know from Scandinavia, from the US, maybe also from Great Britain. Although we do not have a discursive psychology in Germany, that's virtually absent. Yeah. But we have a lot of people who do some kind of applied CA in pedagogy mainly, so classroom interaction is a major topic. Also in economic contexts.
All right. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your current OK project, your involvement in this very large, very happening big project.
Yeah, so it was about 1.5 years ago that we started to assemble a group of researchers from dealing with 14 languages. Wow. I don't know how many countries there are, but it's 14 languages, native speakers of these 14 languages, and highly renowned researchers from CA in interactional linguistics to do a large-scale comparative project on OK. So as an English word which has spread all over the world. And we were wondering, so are there differences in the use of OK in the different languages? How does OK work in different sequential contexts? How does it work in different interaction types? What is the role of prosody in phonetics? Is it, for instance, adapted to the phonetics of the individual languages, or is it more or less the same all over the world? And so, we chose to not to do new recordings for the project, but to use the variety of corpora which people had their hands on at that point. There are some, of course, this creates some problems for comparison, to be sure, but on the other hand, there is a richness of a great variety of interaction types, and you can discover, I guess, quite a lot of uses which you won't discover when, for instance, restricting your research only to one variety of informal conversation. So we thought that this is that we really discovered a richness of uses which was really impressive, but which also much more, at least by now as I see it right now, gave us the idea that the uses are universal to a very high degree. So we did not find things which seem to be highly language dependent, so there may be differences in distribution, but it's hard to really do robust distributional measures because of all of the complexities and of the differences between the corpora we could use. But there's a really fair amount of uses which seem to be common to all languages and which have increased quite a lot. So in the 80s, in the old corpora, we only find OK used for confirmation and for acceptance, and for some closing, maybe transitional, but they seem to be rather closing uses. And now you have all different sorts of uses for doing news receipts, for displaying understanding, for displaying sufficient understanding, for showing a discrepancy of expectation in terms of surprise, or having understood something but not yet enough and projecting more to come. So there's quite a range of different uses. And so one thing we are also interested in to see how OK maybe now takes functions from other items in the individual languages, and if there may be a competition between OK and other discourse particles or formulae which are used for similar concerns.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And then probably one final thing, I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the presentations that you're going to prepare for ICCA this summer.
Yeah, for the ICCA, we will have a panel on the relationship between sequentiality and simultaneity. It's termed early responses, and so the intriguing thing we are dealing with is how can people produce an appropriate fitting response already to a certain first action, like a question or a request. So these are the generic environments, you could say. How can they produce a proper complying action or a proper answer already before the question or the request has been completed? And so this will be analysis which are very, very fine-grained, because it's interesting to see which resources which the prior turn affords you are already used in the response. So for instance, if somebody points to a place and say, can you give me X, then you already can orient very, very early to the referential object, because the pointing gesture goes first, and you can already respond to the pointing gesture before somebody says can. So then the person says can you, and then you already know a request will be coming up. And you maybe bodily already orient in a way to the object towards as Goodwin called it, the domain of scrutiny, where you probably are led to. But you have to wait until the end of the first pair part, until the precise object is named. And so this is especially important if there are alternative objects which may be at issue. But if there's only one object which could be relevant given the joint project as a larger context, then you can see that people already much earlier, before the production of the terminal referential item, turn to the object. And so we are very much interested in these very, very fine-grained moment by moment, well, you could say micro-sequential relationships, because it's simultaneous in terms of, well, the production of the response is simultaneous to the first pair part, but there are these micro-simultaneous relationships between what is already available as information you can use for building your response and the precise part of the response you already produce at that moment. So this is one thing. We have a larger panel on this. I'll be giving a paper, Lorenzo Mondada will be giving a paper, Simona Pekarik-Döll will be in this panel, Elvis De Stefani. Then I'll have another paper on longitudinal CA, on interactional histories in the change of instructions over time in driving school, and the idea is to see how instructions change by virtue of common experience. So it's a way to try to link the idea of an emergence of common ground, and also to in a way reconceptualize the notion of common ground by a CAE methodology, and link this to the concept of recipient design, so that you have an accumulating common ground which accumulates over interactional histories, and you use this for designing your turn with respect to the precise, well, putative knowledge of the interlocutor, which you in a way can, well, calculate or estimate from shared joint interactional experience. So these are two things, and then there's another paper I have with another colleague of mine on German sondern, which is a variety of but. So in English there's only one but. In German there's aber and sondern. So in English you have one item which is but. It is used both for adversative and concessive on the one hand, and antithetic relationships, and for German you only have sondern as a special item. And so this will be a study on how complex sentences are collaboratively produced in interaction. So you can say, I won't come tomorrow, and the other person says sondern, so but, meaning but, and then you have to explain, but maybe 2 days later or so. So, and this is about collaborative production of complex sentences. It's in a panel by run by Jan Maschler. So yes, I would very much like to invite you to attend maybe one of these talks, or maybe several. So this would be really great, and I would like to see you at ICCA.
Thank you. That's really fascinating, and I just want to say this has been such an insightful interview, and thank you for your time over this last few days. They have been probably very busy for you as one of the organizers, so I really appreciate that you have taken time out of your busy schedule to do this interview. Thank you very much. Yeah,
thank you very much for coming to Mannheim, and for showing so much interest in the work that we are doing, and for giving me also this opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we are doing here. So, and it's really great to see what you are doing at Loughborough, to have this archive, to host the ICCA conference, to edit and publish on the ROSI, and so that's really very, very important, the work what you are doing for the community. So we are really very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thank you.